Marcus wiped the grease from his hands with an old rag, the familiar smell of motor oil filling his nostrils as he finished working on Mrs. Henderson's sedan. The afternoon sun streamed through the garage windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor littered with tools and car parts. At 32, Marcus had been running his small auto repair shop for nearly 8 years, ever since he returned from his military service overseas. The jagged scar that ran from his left temple down to his jawline caught the light as he moved. It was a constant reminder of that fateful day in Afghanistan, when an improvised explosive device had torn through his convoy. The explosion had claimed 2 of his brothers in arms, and left Marcus with more than just physical scars. But he had learned to live with it, even though the looks from strangers never got easier. His 4-year-old daughter Emma sat on a small stool nearby, coloring in her princess coloring book while keeping him company during the slow afternoon. Her blonde pigtails bounced as she worked intently on staying within the lines, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. She was the light of his world, the reason he got up every morning and pushed through the difficult days. "Daddy, look." Emma held up her picture proudly, showing him a princess in a bright pink dress riding a unicorn. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." Marcus smiled, his heart warming at her innocence. "You're getting really good at coloring." The bell above the shop door chimed, and 3 well-dressed men in their 40s walked in, their expensive suits looking completely out of place in the humble garage. They were clearly from the wealthy side of town, the kind of people who usually took their luxury cars to the high-end dealerships across the city. "Excuse me," the tallest one with slicked-back hair called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "We need someone to look at my BMW. It's making a strange noise." Marcus stood up, wiping his hands again. "Of course, sir, I'd be happy to take a look. What kind of noise is it making?" As he approached them, the man's eyes immediately fixated on Marcus's scar. His expression changed from mild annoyance to something much worse, disgust mixed with cruel amusement. He nudged his companions, and they all began staring at Marcus's face with undisguised mockery. "Jesus Christ, what happened to your face?" the man sneered. "Did you get in a fight with a lawnmower?" His friends burst into laughter, and Marcus felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. He had dealt with insensitive comments before, but rarely so blatantly cruel. Emma looked up from her coloring book, confusion evident in her innocent blue eyes as she sensed the tension in the room. "I can still help you with your car, sir," Marcus said quietly, trying to maintain his professionalism despite the humiliation. "Help us?" Another man chimed in, a stocky guy with a gold watch that probably cost more than Marcus made in 3 months. "Look at this place, it's a dump, and you look like you should be hiding in a basement somewhere, not working on people's cars." The third man, wearing designer glasses, joined the cruel chorus. "Seriously, how do you expect people to trust you with their vehicles when you can't even take care of your own face? That scar is disgusting. You should wear a mask or something." Marcus clenched his fists at his sides, fighting every instinct to defend himself. He thought about the brothers he had lost, the sacrifices they had all made, the hell they had endured in service to their country. These men had no idea what that scar represented, the price of freedom they enjoyed while mocking the very people who had fought to preserve it. "Daddy?" Emma's small voice cut through the tension. She had abandoned her coloring book and was looking at him with worried eyes. "Are you okay?" The sight of his daughter's concern was like a punch to the good. Marcus realized she was witnessing this humiliation, seeing her father being treated like a freak show. He knelt down beside her, forcing a smile despite the rage burning in his chest. "I'm fine, baby. These gentlemen are just leaving." But the men weren't done. The leader stepped closer, his voice getting louder and more aggressive. "You know what? I wouldn't let you touch my car if you were the last mechanic on Earth. This whole place is probably as messed up as your face. Come on, guys. Let's find a real garage with normal-looking people." As they turned to leave, the man with the gold watch couldn't resist one final insult. "Maybe you should consider a different line of work, something where people don't have to look at you. Like working in a morgue or something." Their laughter echoed through the garage as they walked out, leaving Marcus standing there with his hands shaking from suppressed anger. Emma had tears in her eyes, not fully understanding what had happened but sensing that people had been mean to her daddy. Why were those men so mean? She asked in a whisper. Marcus picked her up, holding her close as he struggled to find the right words. How do you explain cruelty to a 4-year-old? How do you tell your child that some people judge others by their appearance without crushing her faith in humanity? Sometimes people say mean things when they don't understand something, he said, softly, carrying her to the window to watch the men drive away in their shiny BMW. But that doesn't make it right, and it doesn't make what they said true. As the expensive car disappeared down the street, Marcus felt the familiar weight of isolation settle on his shoulders. This wasn't the first time he had been mocked for his scars, and it wouldn't be the last. But having Emma witness it made it somehow worse. He worried about her growing up seeing her father treated this way, about how it might affect her view of the world and her place in it. The garage fell silent, except for the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Marcus set Emma back down on her stool and returned to his work, but his hands were still trembling slightly. The encounter had shaken him more than he cared to admit, reopening old wounds that went much deeper than the scar on his face. The incident with the 3 men haunted Marcus for days. Every time he looked in the mirror while shaving, their cruel words echoed in his mind. The scar that had once been a badge of honor, a reminder of his service and survival, now felt like a burden he couldn't escape. He found himself avoiding eye contact with customers, keeping his head down and speaking only when necessary. Business had been slow lately, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that word was spreading about the scary mechanic with the messed up face. Several regular customers had stopped coming and new clients were few and far between. The bills were piling up on his small desk in the corner office. Rent for the shop, Emma's daycare fees, groceries, utilities. The numbers didn't add up anymore. Emma had been asking more questions since the incident. Children notice everything, and she had picked up on her father's changed mood. During their evening routine of reading bedtime stories, she would touch his scar gently with her tiny fingers. "Does it hurt, Daddy?" she asked one night as they sat on her bed with her favorite book about talking animals. "Not anymore, sweetheart," Marcus replied, though the emotional pain was worse than the physical had ever been. "I think it looks like lightning," Emma said innocently. "Like you're a superhero who got struck by magic lightning." Her words brought tears to his eyes. In her pure, uncomplicated worldview, his scar wasn't a disfigurement. It was something special, even magical. If only the rest of the world could see through her eyes. The next morning brought another blow. Marcus arrived at the shop to find a notice taped to his door from the landlord. Rent was overdue, and he had 30 days to pay or face eviction. He crumpled the paper in his fist, feeling the walls closing in around him. Mrs. Patterson from the flower shop next door emerged from her store, her face full of sympathy. She was one of the few people in the neighborhood who treated Marcus with genuine kindness, never staring at his scar or making him feel like a monster. "Marcus, honey, I heard about those awful men who were here the other day," she said, shaking her gray head in disgust. "Mrs. Henderson told me what happened. I'm so sorry you had to deal with that, especially in front of Emma." "It's fine, Mrs. Patterson, I'm used to it," Marcus lied, unlocking his shop door. "No, it's not fine," she said firmly. "What those men did was cruel and ignorant. You're one of the best mechanics in this city, and you're a good father. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Her words provided some comfort, but they couldn't pay the bills or bring back the customers who had stopped coming. As the morning wore on, Marcus found himself staring at the photo he kept on his workbench. A picture of his old army unit taken just weeks before the explosion that had changed everything. There were 8 of them in the photo, all young and full of hope, believing they were making a difference in the world. Now 2 of them were buried in Arlington National Cemetery. 3 others had moved on with their lives and lost touch, and Marcus felt more alone than ever. The sound of expensive engines outside caught his attention. Through the window, he saw 2 luxury cars pulling up, a Mercedes and a Lexus. His heart sank as he recognized one of the men from the previous week's humiliation getting out of the Mercedes. The man had brought friends this time, and they were all pointing at his shop and laughing. Marcus quickly moved away from the window, but it was too late. The group had seen him and were now walking toward the door with obvious malicious intent. There were 5 of them this time, all dressed in expensive clothing and wearing expressions of cruel amusement. The bell chimed as they entered, and Marcus braced himself for another round of harassment. Emma wasn't there this time. She was at daycare, but somehow that made Marcus feel even more vulnerable. "Well, well, well," the leader from the previous visit announced loudly. "Look who it is, Scarface the mechanic. I told my buddies about this place and they didn't believe me. But here you are still scaring away customers with that hideous face." The new additions to the group were even worse than the original 3. One of them, a man with perfectly styled silver hair, pulled out his phone and started taking pictures. "This is going straight to social media," he declared. "Everyone needs to see this freak show. Maybe we can get him shut down for being a public health hazard." Another man, younger than the others but equally cruel, started making exaggerated faces mimicking what he thought Marcus's expression looked like. His performance drew raucous laughter from the group. "Seriously, how do you even eat with a face like that?" the young man taunted. "Do you have to use a straw for everything?" Marcus felt his military training kicking in, the ability to remain calm under pressure, to assess threats and respond accordingly. But this wasn't a combat situation where he could fight back. These were civilians, customers technically, and any physical response would only make his situation worse. "I need to ask you gentlemen to leave," Marcus said as calmly as possible. "You're disturbing my business." "Your business?" The silver-haired man with the phone laughed so hard he nearly dropped his device. "What business? Look at this dump. The only thing you're good for is entertainment. We should charge admission for people to come and stare at the monster." The cruelty escalated as they began moving around the shop, picking up tools and examining them as if Marcus might have contaminated them just by touching them. One man pretended to be afraid of a simple wrench, cowering dramatically and claiming it might be infected with ugly. Marcus's hands began to shake again, not from fear but from the overwhelming urge to defend himself, to show these cowards what real toughness looked like. But he couldn't. He had Emma to think about, bills to pay, a business to save. Fighting back would only give them ammunition to use against him. The harassment continued for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. They took more pictures, made more jokes, and left more emotional scars than Marcus thought he could bear. By the time they finally grew bored and left, promising to bring more friends to see the freak show, Marcus was mentally exhausted. He sat down heavily on his work stool, putting his head in his hands. For the first time since returning from Afghanistan, Marcus found himself wondering if the explosion should have killed him too. Maybe his brothers who didn't make it home were the lucky ones. They didn't have to deal with this kind of daily humiliation, didn't have to worry about their children seeing them treated like monsters. 2 weeks after the second wave of harassment, Marcus hit rock bottom. The photos and videos the men had taken were spreading through social media like wildfire. Local Facebook groups were sharing images of him with cruel captions, calling him everything from Frankenstein's mechanic to the garage goblin. The comments were brutal, with people he had never met making jokes about his appearance and questioning his fitness to work with the public. The online humiliation translated directly to his business. Walk-in customers took one look at him and made excuses to leave. Phone calls for appointments dropped to almost nothing. Even some of his longtime customers began taking their cars elsewhere, too embarrassed to be associated with the infamous, scarred mechanic who had become a local laughingstock. Marcus's savings account, already stretched thin, was now completely empty. He had been forced to choose between paying for Emma's daycare or keeping the lights on at the shop. He chose the daycare, knowing that his daughter needed stability and care while he tried to salvage their situation. This meant working in an increasingly cold garage as autumn deepened, wrapped in old army blankets while he struggled to fix the few cars that still came his way. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon when Emma's daycare director, Ms. Rodriguez, called with devastating news. Other parents had been complaining about Marcus picking up his daughter. They had seen the social media posts and were concerned about that dangerous-looking man being around their children. Some had even threatened to pull their kids from the daycare if Emma continued attending. "I'm so sorry, Marcus," Ms. Rodriguez said, her voice full of genuine regret. "You know I don't agree with any of this. Emma is a wonderful child and you're a good father. But I have to think about the business. I'm going to have to ask you to find alternative arrangements for Emma's care." The phone call ended with Marcus staring at the device in disbelief. His daughter was being punished because of his appearance, because of scars he had earned serving his country. The injustice of it all threatened to crush what remained of his spirit. That evening, as he tucked Emma into bed in their small apartment, above the garage, she looked up at him with those innocent blue eyes that always seemed to see right through to his soul. "Daddy, why do I have to stay with Mrs. Patterson tomorrow instead of going to school?" she asked, referring to their elderly neighbor who had kindly offered to watch Emma when she learned about the daycare situation. Marcus struggled to find words that wouldn't frighten her or destroy her faith in the goodness of people. "Sometimes, grown-ups make decisions that don't make sense, sweetheart, but it's just temporary. We'll figure something out." "Is it because of your lightning scar?" Emma asked, her small hand reaching up to trace the jagged line on his face. "Because I told Tommy at school that my daddy was a superhero and he said superheroes aren't real." The innocent question broke Marcus's heart. He pulled her close, breathing in the sweet scent of her strawberry shampoo, trying to memorize this moment of pure love before the harsh world could touch her any further. "My scar tells a story about people who were very brave," he said softly. "But some people don't understand stories like that. It doesn't make the story less true or less important." After Emma fell asleep, Marcus sat alone in his small living room, surrounded by unpaid bills and eviction notices. He pulled out his laptop and began typing a letter he never thought he would write, an application for disability benefits based on his war injuries. The irony wasn't lost on him, that the same government that had sent him to war now might be his only lifeline to keep his daughter housed and fed. The physical wounds from the explosion had healed years ago, but the psychological impact was becoming clearer every day. The constant stares, the cruel comments, the social isolation, it was all taking a toll he hadn't fully acknowledged. For the first time since returning home, Marcus admitted to himself that he might be suffering from more than just physical scars. Late that night, unable to sleep, Marcus found himself looking through old photos on his phone. Pictures of his army unit, images from before the explosion when his face was unmarked and his future seemed full of possibilities. There was a photo from his and Sarah's wedding day. Sarah, Emma's mother, who had died in a car accident when Emma was just 2 years old. She had never seen his scars, had never had to deal with the stares and whispers that now defined his daily existence. "I'm failing her, Sarah," he whispered to the photo, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I'm failing our little girl and I don't know how to fix it." The next morning brought no relief. Marcus opened the shop even though he had no appointments, partly out of habit and partly because he couldn't bear to spend another day trapped in the apartment with his thoughts. The familiar routine of organizing tools and checking inventory provided some small comfort, even if there were no cars to work on. Around noon, a black sedan pulled up outside the shop. Marcus watched warily as a man in an expensive suit got out and approached the door. His first instinct was to brace for another round of harassment, but something about this man was different. He moved with purpose rather than malicious curiosity, and his expression was serious rather than mocking. The man entered the shop and looked around, taking in the neat organization despite the obvious financial struggles. His eyes found Marcus and lingered on the scar, but there was no disgust or amusement in his gaze, just careful assessment. "Are you Marcus Thompson?" the man asked, his voice professional and neutral. "Yes, sir. How can I help you?" Marcus replied cautiously. "My name is David Walsh. I'm a reporter with the local newspaper. I've been following the story about the social media harassment you've been experiencing." Marcus's heart sank. A reporter could only mean more exposure, more humiliation for him and Emma. "I'm not interested in talking to the press," he said quickly. "I understand your hesitation," Walsh continued, "but I'm not here to sensationalize your story. I'm here because I think there's a bigger story here about how we treat our veterans, about the price of service that goes beyond what most people Understand. The reporter's words gave Marcus pause, but he remained guarded. What do you want from me? I want to tell your story, the real story. Not the cruel jokes and social media posts, but the truth about who you are and what you've been through. I've done some research, Marcus. I know about your service record, about the Purple Heart you earned, about the brothers you lost. The public deserves to know the full picture. Marcus considered the offer, weighing the potential for more exposure against the possibility that someone might finally tell his side of the story, but the risk felt too great, especially with Emma's welfare hanging in the balance. I appreciate what you're trying to do, Marcus said finally, but I can't take that chance. My daughter has already been hurt enough by all this attention. I just want it to go away. The reporter nodded understandingly and handed Marcus his business card. I respect that decision, but if you change your mind, please call me. Sometimes the only way to stop the darkness is to shine a light on the truth. The following week brought an unexpected visitor to Marcus's garage. It was a quiet Thursday morning, and Marcus was half-heartedly organizing his tools when he heard the rumble of a motorcycle pulling up outside. Through the window, he saw an older man dismounting from a well-maintained Harley-Davidson. The rider was probably in his 60s, with gray hair and a weathered face that spoke of decades spent outdoors. What caught Marcus's attention immediately was how the man carried himself, the straight posture, the purposeful stride, the way he surveyed his surroundings before approaching the door. Marcus recognized the bearing immediately. This was a military man, probably a veteran like himself. The man entered the shop and removed his leather jacket, revealing a faded t-shirt with Vietnam veteran printed across the chest. His eyes found Marcus and settled on him with the same careful assessment Marcus had learned to expect, but there was no disgust or mockery in his gaze. Instead, there was something Marcus hadn't seen in a long time. Understanding. You Marcus Thompson? The man asked, his voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who had spent years shouting orders over the noise of military equipment. Yes, sir. What can I do for you? Marcus replied, instinctively straightening his own posture. The man stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. Name's Frank Sullivan. I heard about what's been happening to you around here. Figured it was time someone stood up and said something about it. Marcus felt his defenses rising. If you're here to gawk or take pictures, son, Frank interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. I didn't come here to gawk. I came here because I recognize a brother when I see one. The word brother hit Marcus like a physical blow. It had been years since anyone had used that term with him. The word that connected all those who had served, who had faced danger in foreign lands for people they would never meet. Frank continued, his eyes moving to Marcus's left arm where a tattoo was partially visible beneath his work shirt. That ink on your arm, that's the 3rd Infantry Division, isn't it? The Rock of the Marne? Marcus's hand automatically went to his arm, covering the tattoo that few people ever noticed or understood. The fact that this stranger had recognized it meant he was indeed dealing with another veteran, someone who understood the significance of such markings. How did you? Marcus began. My nephew served with the 3rd ID, Frank explained. Did 2 tours in Afghanistan. He came back with stories about the guys in his unit, about the brotherhood they shared. He also came back with nightmares and scars that don't show on the outside. There was a moment of silence as both men assessed each other, the invisible connection between veterans sparking to life. Frank's eyes moved to Marcus's scar, but there was no judgment there, only recognition of a wound earned in service. That scar tells a story, Frank said quietly. And I'm betting it's a story of courage, not cowardice, am I right? Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. It had been so long since anyone had looked at his scar and seen something other than a disfigurement, something other than a reason to mock or avoid him. IED, Marcus said simply. Lost 2 good men that day. Should have been 3. Frank nodded slowly, understanding passing between them without need for further explanation. The ones who don't make it home, they don't have to deal with this kind of treatment. Sometimes I think we survivors got the harder job. The older veteran looked around the garage, taking in the organized workspace and the quality of Marcus's tools. I've been working on bikes for 40 years. I know good work when I see it, and this is a good shop. The fact that people are staying away because of how you look, that's not just ignorance, son. That's disgraceful. I appreciate you saying that, Mr. Sullivan, but I'm not sure what anyone can do about it now, Marcus said, the weight of his situation settling back onto his shoulders. The damage is done. People have made up their minds about me. Frank studied him for a long moment, then pulled out his phone. You mind if I take a look at that tattoo? The whole thing? Marcus hesitated. His tattoo was more than just a unit. Designation. It was a complete memorial piece that covered most of his upper arm. It included the names of his fallen brothers, dates of their service, and symbols that represented their shared experiences. It was intensely personal, something he rarely showed to anyone. I know it's personal, Frank said, sensing his hesitation, but trust me on this one. Sometimes the best way to fight ignorance is with truth. Something in the older man's tone convinced Marcus to roll up his sleeve. The tattoo was revealed in all its detailed glory, a work of art that told the story of sacrifice, brotherhood, and survival. Frank studied it carefully, taking in every detail. Jesus Christ, Frank whispered, not in mockery but in reverence. This is beautiful work. And these names, these are your brothers? Jeremy Chen and Miguel Rodriguez, Marcus said quietly. They died when our convoy hit the IED. Jeremy was going to be a teacher when he got home. Miguel had a baby girl he never got to meet. Frank's eyes were bright with unshed tears. And you carry them with you. Every day. Every day, Marcus confirmed. The older veteran pulled out his phone again. I'm going to ask you to trust me, son. I want to take a picture of this tattoo, and I want to share it with some people I know. People who understand what it means to serve, what it means to sacrifice. Marcus's first instinct was to refuse. The harassment had started with photos after all, but there was something about Frank Sullivan that inspired trust. The confidence of a man who had faced his own battles and emerged with his integrity intact. What are you planning to do? Marcus asked. I'm planning to remind this community what a real hero looks like, Frank replied. I'm planning to show them that the man they've been mocking is someone who bled for their freedom, and I'm planning to make sure they understand that this treatment of our veterans stops now. Frank went on to explain that he was a member of several veteran organizations in the area, groups that had significant influence in the community. He also mentioned that his brother-in-law was a city councilman, and his daughter worked for the local television station. The people who've been harassing you, they're cowards, Frank said bluntly. They pick on you because they think you're alone, because they think no one will stand up for you. But they're wrong. You've got more brothers than you realize, and it's time they met a few of them. As Frank prepared to leave, he turned back to Marcus with a serious expression. There's going to be some attention coming your way, son. But this time it's going to be the right kind of attention. Can you handle that? Marcus thought about Emma, about the bills piling up, about the eviction notice in his desk drawer. He thought about the years of silence, of accepting mistreatment because he didn't want to cause trouble. I can handle it, he said firmly. Frank smiled for the first time since entering the shop. Good, because it's time this community learned what real courage looks like. And it's time they started treating our veterans with the respect they've earned. Frank Sullivan worked quickly and efficiently, like a man on a mission. Within 24 hours of his visit to Marcus's garage, he had contacted every veteran organization in the Tri-County area. The photo of Marcus's memorial tattoo, along with the story Frank had carefully crafted, began spreading through a very different network than the one that had been sharing cruel memes and jokes. The Veterans of Foreign Wars Post, the American Legion, the Disabled American Veterans Chapter, and dozens of smaller military support groups received Frank's message. It detailed Marcus's service record, the circumstances of his injury, and the shameful way he had been treated by members of their community. Frank didn't just share the story. He called for action. Marcus first became aware of the growing movement on Friday morning when he arrived at his shop to find 3 motorcycles parked outside. Frank Sullivan was there with 2 other men, both clearly veterans from the way they carried themselves. They were examining Marcus's shop sign and discussing something in low, serious voices. Morning, Marcus, Frank called out as he approached. I'd like you to meet a couple of friends of mine. This is Tom Bradley. He served with the Marines in Iraq. And this is James Wright. Army, like yourself, did 3 tours in Afghanistan. Both men stepped forward to shake Marcus's hand, and he was struck by the firm grips and direct eye contact. These were men who understood respect and weren't afraid to show it. Frank told us about your situation, Tom said. His Marine buzz cut gray, but his posture still military straight. We wanted to meet you personally and let you know that you're not alone in this fight. James, a black man with kind eyes and arms covered in tattoos similar to Marcus's, nodded in agreement. Brother, what's been happening to you is unacceptable. No veteran should have to endure that kind of treatment, especially not from people who've never had the courage to serve their country. Over the next hour, more veterans began arriving. Some came on motorcycles, others in pickup trucks with military bumper stickers, and a few in regular cars but wearing veteran organization T-shirts or military unit caps. By noon, there were nearly 20 veterans gathered in and around Marcus's garage. The sight was overwhelming. Marcus hadn't been surrounded by this many fellow service members since his discharge from the Army. The familiar camaraderie, the shared understanding, the brotherhood he thought he had lost forever, it was all there, stronger than ever. Frank called for everyone's attention. Brothers and sisters, we're here today because one of our own has been under attack. Not by enemy forces in a foreign land, but by ignorant civilians right here at home. Marcus Thompson served his country with honor, sacrificed his blood for our freedom, and came home to be treated like a monster by people who don't understand the first thing about courage or sacrifice. A murmur of anger rippled through the gathered veterans. Marcus could see the indignation in their faces, the protective instinct that kicked in when one of their own was threatened. "What's the plan, Frank?" asked a woman veteran with short blonde hair and navy tattoos on her forearms. Frank smiled grimly. "The plan is simple. We're going to educate this community about who Marcus really is, and we're going to make sure the cowards who've been harassing him understand that they're not just picking on one man. They're disrespecting every person who's ever worn the uniform." The group spent the afternoon planning what they called Operation Respect. It was a multi-pronged approach that would use social media, local news outlets, veteran networks, and community connections to tell Marcus's real story. Frank's daughter at the TV station had already agreed to do a feature piece on veteran treatment in the community. Meanwhile, the online veteran community was mobilizing with military precision. The cruel memes and jokes that had been circulating were being met with powerful responses. Photos of Marcus's memorial tattoo accompanied by his service record, testimonials from other veterans about the reality of combat injuries, and sharp rebukes for anyone who continued to mock a wounded warrior. The tide began to turn over the weekend. The local newspaper, the same one whose reporter had approached Marcus earlier, ran a front-page story about the mistreatment of veterans. While they couldn't use Marcus's name without his permission, they painted a clear picture of the situation and challenged the community to do better. Social media posts from veteran organizations began going viral, not with cruelty and mockery, but with respect and support. The photo of Marcus's tattoo, shared with his permission, became a symbol of sacrifice and remembrance. People began sharing their own stories of veteran family members, of the hidden costs of military service, of the debt owed to those who had served. By Monday morning, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Marcus arrived at his shop to find a small crowd gathered outside, but this time they weren't there to gawk or take cruel photos. They were there to show support. Mrs. Henderson, his longtime customer who had stayed loyal throughout the harassment, was there with a group of other elderly residents from her neighborhood. Several young families with small children had come to apologize for avoiding his business. Even some local business owners had gathered to show their support. But the most surprising visitor was David Walsh, the reporter who had approached Marcus weeks earlier. He was standing near the entrance with a camera operator and a professional-looking woman with a microphone. "Mr. Thompson," the woman called out as he approached. "I'm Sandra Martinez from Channel 7 News. We'd like to do a follow-up story about the community response to your situation. Would you be willing to speak with us?" Marcus looked around at the crowd of supporters, at the veterans who had rallied to his cause, at the community members who had come to show their respect. For the first time in months, he didn't feel alone. "Yes," he said quietly. "I think it's time my story was told properly." The interview took place right there in front of his garage, with the crowd of supporters forming a natural backdrop. Sandra Martinez proved to be a skilled interviewer who drew out Marcus's story with compassion and respect. He spoke about his military service, about the day his convoy was attacked, about losing his brothers Jeremy and Miguel. He talked about coming home wounded, about trying to build a life for himself and his daughter, and about the cruel treatment he had endured. When Sandra asked about his memorial tattoo, Marcus rolled up his sleeve without hesitation. The camera captured every detail of the intricate artwork as he explained the meaning behind each element, the dates, the names, the symbols that represented his fallen comrades. "This isn't just a tattoo," Marcus said, his voice steady and clear. "It's a promise that Jeremy and Miguel will never be forgotten, that their sacrifice meant something. When people mock my scars or my appearance, they're not just hurting me. They're dishonoring the memory of two heroes who died protecting the freedoms we all enjoy." Frank Sullivan stepped forward during the interview to add his perspective. "Marcus represents the best of America," he said firmly. "He volunteered to serve, he bled for his country, and he came home to build a life and raise his daughter with dignity. The fact that some people in this community have treated him with such cruelty says nothing about Marcus and everything about their own character." The interview concluded with Marcus making a simple request. "I don't want sympathy," he said, looking directly into the camera. "I just want to be treated with the same basic human decency that everyone deserves. My scars tell a story of service and sacrifice. I'm proud of that story, and I'm proud of the brothers who didn't make it home to tell theirs." As the news crew packed up their equipment, members of the crowd began approaching Marcus individually. Some were offering apologies for their past behavior or the behavior of their friends and family. Others were offering support, promises to bring their cars to his shop, recommendations to friends and neighbors, expressions of gratitude for his service. A young mother with 2 small children stepped forward shyly. "Mr. Thompson, I'm ashamed to admit that I was one of the people who shared those awful posts online. I didn't think about the real person behind the photos, about what you had been through. I'm sorry, and I want to do better." Her honesty and vulnerability touched Marcus deeply. "Thank you for saying that," he replied. "It takes courage to admit when we've made mistakes. That's how we all grow and become better." An elderly man in a wheelchair, clearly a veteran himself, rolled up to Marcus with tears in his eyes. "Son, I lost my legs in Vietnam. I know what it's like to come home different than when you left. You're handling this with more grace than I ever did. Your brothers would be proud." The words hit Marcus like a physical force. Throughout all the harassment and humiliation, he had wondered whether Jeremy and Miguel would approve of how he was handling things, whether he was honoring their memory properly. To hear from another veteran that they would be proud gave him a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. As the crowd began to disperse, Marcus found himself standing with Frank and the other veterans who had rallied to his cause. The brotherhood he felt with these men and women was palpable, a connection forged by shared experience and mutual respect. "This is just the beginning," Frank told him. "The story's going to air tonight, and by tomorrow morning, everyone in this city is going to know who you really are. Are you ready for that?" The news story aired that evening at 6 o'clock, and by 8, Marcus's phone was ringing nonstop. The first call was from Emma's former daycare director, Ms. Rodriguez, who was nearly in tears as she apologized and begged Marcus to bring Emma back. The second call was from his landlord, offering to waive the late fees on his rent and expressing shame for not standing up for him earlier. But it was the third call that truly surprised him. It was from Robert Harrison, the CEO of Harrison Automotive, the largest car dealership group in the region. Marcus recognized the name immediately. Harrison's dealership serviced luxury vehicles and had a reputation for only working with the most elite mechanics and body shops. "Mr. Thompson, I saw the news story tonight," Harrison said, his voice carrying obvious emotion. I'm a veteran myself. Navy, served in the Gulf War. What happened to you is unconscionable, and I want to do something about it." Harrison went on to explain that his company was looking for an exclusive partner to handle specialty repairs and custom work for their high-end clients. The contract would be worth more than Marcus currently made in 6 months, and it would come with the prestige of being associated with the Harrison name. But more than that, Harrison continued, I want to make a statement. I want everyone in this community to know that Harrison Automotive stands behind our veterans. Would you be interested in discussing a partnership? Marcus could barely believe what he was hearing. Just weeks ago, he had been facing eviction and social exile. Now he was being offered a business opportunity that could change his and Emma's lives forever. The next morning brought even more surprises. Marcus arrived at his shop to find a line of cars waiting for service, more vehicles than he had seen in months. Word had spread quickly through the veteran community and beyond, and people were coming from across the city to show their support by bringing him their business. Among the customers was a familiar face that made Marcus's blood run cold initially. It was one of the men from the original group who had harassed him, but this time the man wasn't accompanied by his cruel friends, and his demeanor was completely different. "Mr. Thompson," the man said, approaching Marcus with obvious shame written across his face. "My name is Richard Caldwell. I was one of the men who treated you so badly. I came here to apologize and to try to make amends." Marcus studied the man carefully, looking for signs of insincerity or hidden mockery. But all he saw was genuine remorse and embarrassment. "I saw the news story last night," Caldwell continued. "I had no idea about your military service, about what you had been through. That doesn't excuse my behavior, nothing could excuse that, but I wanted you to know that I'm ashamed of myself, and I want to do better." The man went on to explain that he had been raised with privilege and had never really understood the sacrifices made by military families. Seeing Marcus's memorial tattoo and hearing about his fallen brothers had opened his eyes to a world he had never considered. "I know I can't undo what I did," Caldwell said, "but I want to try to make it right. I'd like to bring all my vehicles here for service, and I want to recommend your shop to everyone I know. It's the least I can do." Throughout the day, similar scenes played out as other members of the original harassment group came forward to apologize. Not all of them. Some were too proud or too stubborn to admit their mistakes, but enough to show that people could change when confronted with the truth. Frank Sullivan arrived in the afternoon with more good news. The veteran organizations had raised enough money to cover Marcus's back rent and provide a buffer fund for slow months. Additionally, several members had volunteered to help him expand his shop and upgrade his equipment. "We take care of our own," Frank said simply. That's what brothers do. The most emotional moment of the day came when Emma arrived after school, brought by Mrs. Patterson, who had been watching her. The little girl's eyes widened as she saw the busy garage full of cars and customers. "Daddy, why are there so many people here?" she asked, her voice full of wonder. Marcus knelt down to her level, his heart swelling with pride and hope for the first time in months. "People found out that your daddy is a hero," he said softly, "and they wanted to meet you, too, because you're a hero's daughter." Emma's face lit up with the pure joy that only children can express. "I knew you were a superhero," she exclaimed, touching his scar gently. "I told everyone about your magic lightning." As the weeks passed, Marcus's life transformed completely. His business thrived as word spread about the quality of his work and the story of his resilience. The partnership with Harrison Automotive provided financial stability and opened doors to new opportunities he had never imagined. More importantly, his place in the community was restored and strengthened. The local elementary school invited him to speak to students about service and sacrifice during Veterans Day ceremonies. The city council passed a resolution recognizing his contributions to the community and establishing new programs to support veteran-owned businesses. Emma was able to return to her daycare, where she was welcomed back with enthusiasm. The other children, having learned about her father's heroism, now looked at her with admiration rather than fear. She proudly told anyone who would listen about her daddy's lightning scar and how it made him special. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Marcus stood in his expanded garage watching Emma color at her small table while he organized his new tools. The space buzzed with the energy of success and possibility. Orders were backed up for weeks. His bank account was healthy for the first time in years, and most importantly, he and Emma were no longer outcasts in their own community. Frank Sullivan stopped by, as he did most weekends, to check on Marcus and share stories about their military experiences. The older veteran had become something of a father figure, filling a void that Marcus hadn't even realized existed. "You know," Frank said, watching Emma concentrate on her coloring book, "there's something beautiful about how this all worked out. Those cowards thought they could tear you down, make you disappear. Instead, they ended up making you stronger and bringing the community together." Marcus nodded, thinking about the journey from despair to redemption. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best outcomes. Emma will grow up knowing that standing up for what's right matters, that people can change, and that heroes come in all forms. As the sun set through the garage windows, casting long shadows across the busy workspace, Marcus felt a profound sense of peace. His scars would always be with him, visible reminders of loss and sacrifice. But they were no longer sources of shame or isolation. They had become what they were always meant to be: badges of honor, symbols of service, and testament to the unbreakable bonds between those who serve. The laughter of his daughter filled the garage as she showed him her latest masterpiece. A drawing of a man with a lightning bolt on his face, surrounded by other people who were all smiling and waving. At the bottom, in her careful 4-year-old handwriting, she had written, "My hero, Daddy." Marcus hung the picture on his office wall, right next to the photo of his old Army unit. Jeremy and Miguel smiled back at him from the image, and for the first time since their deaths, Marcus felt certain that his brothers would indeed be proud of the man he had become and the life he was building for their memory.